Some huge reveals today for perhaps the highest and most widely regarded Terminator formation in Warhammer 40k. We've got a big damage detachment rule, several confirmed datasheet details, and a perhaps suspect points page. Lots of good stuff for the Deathwing, so let's take a look at what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today it's Dark Angels week with the launch of this new Deathwing Assault box set. And Games Workshop does seem to have given a particularly generous preview to the iconic bone-coloured Terminators that seem to be at the centre of this Dark Angels release, with a fairly meaty rules preview on the Deathwing today. It seems that Codex Dark Angels isn't too far away right now, and it'll first be available to pre-order this weekend in the Deathwing Assault box set, the one that has 15 Terminators plus Belial, plus the new Codex data cards and some upgrade sprues. As confirmed the other day, it looks like the Dark Angels have 3 different detachments within this codex: the Unforgiven Task Force, which I'm going to hope might be at least somewhat reimagined for the Dark Angels core forces, the Inner Circle Task Force, which focuses on the Deathwing, and the Company of Hunters for the Raven Wing. Yesterday's big reveals focused on the Raven Wing. I'll leave a link to my review of that down in the video description, but today we seem to have a fairly meaty amount of stuff for the Deathwing, because not only did they give us a Warhammer community article previewing the new rules, but they also have a Warhammer Plus battle report featuring Deathwing, Belial leading a few squads into battle against some Chaos Space Marines, and in that one a few more rules came up, including a stratagem and some melee weapon profiles. Basically between the two we've got the Inner Circle rule and a teaser of a stratagem and an enhancement, lots of datasheet teasers, confirmations, and other interesting teasers, plus and perhaps most dodgily a points list that I'm going to guess is probably false and unhelpful at this point for reasons that we'll get onto, but it's still certainly interesting in its own right. Seeing as we're on the subject of Deathwing again, I thought I'd just briefly mention that the channel giveaway for February will be for 6 copies of the Deathwing Assault box set that goes up for pre-order this weekend. I'll be posting out 6 of those with the new Codex, Belial and the 15 Terminators, and if you want to know how to enter for that, I'll revisit it at the end of the video. So far, Deathwing 10th edition have maybe been faring a little bit better compared with their Ravenwing counterparts. In Codex Dark Angels, they've had 5 unique datasheets: Grandmaster Belial, the standard Deathwing Terminator squad, the Deathwing Knights with their big storm shields and maces of absolution, plus access to the Deathwing Lieutenant in the Strike Master and the Command Squad, though I have a feeling that both of those might well be gone in the new Codex. The Command Squad won't have any official models for it, though I guess the Strike Master might survive if they're feeling generous enough to allow a Deathwing Sergeant to act up as him still. If you really want to run a Deathwing themed force, there's also all the generic datasheets, the standard Terminators and the Termi Assault Squad, plus I guess the Blade Guard Veterans, which Games Workshop inducted into the Deathwing in 9th edition, so they've certainly got options. In competitive lists though, Dark Angels players don't really tend to be going down the full Terminator sort of lifestyle at the moment. In general, it's far more common to see plenty of datasheets from standard Codex Space Marines, and maybe just a few Dark Angels in support, often Azrael. Though besides Azrael, I'd say the other most commonly played datasheet is the one for the Deathwing Knights. Massively tanky Terminators with 4 wounds and -1 damage, which are pretty good anvil units that can laugh off some of the worst of the enemy's damage output and still have enough melee to totally put the smack down on the enemy's best and brightest. Fielding them in enormous units with really quite a high points cost means that they're pretty strong for stratagem and character support, plus they're quite good with some enhancements like say the Vanguard Spearhead one to infiltrate that entire unit up the board. That can be really quite intimidating. I have seen some people use the Terminator Command Squad as well, which has some big benefits like the banner and being able to resurrect a Terminator per turn, though as I said I'd guess that might no longer be an option when the Codex comes out. It does seem though that compared with 9th edition, when entire Deathwing armies were one of the strongest ways to play Dark Angels, it looks like the Terminators tend to support a more balanced green wing sort of force, as opposed to being spammed unless you're playing a fun and fluffy list. It'll be interesting to see whether this Inner Circle Task Force will change that though. This one is basically an entire detachment that seems really focused on Deathwing infantry, so certainly going to encourage you to put loads of Terminators on the tabletop. The core rule is Vowed Target, and this almost feels like a second Oath of moment that you get, where in the command phase you get to nominate one objective on the board, and then any Deathwing infantry units get +1 to wound any of the enemies that happen to be within range of that objective marker. +1 to wound is really quite a serious damage boost, means that you could have Stormbolters wounding enemy Space Marines on 3s, or Power Fists punching up against Imperial Knights or Lander Raiders and wounding on a 4, and you could potentially combine it with Oath of Moment so you're getting more hits against those targets that are super easy to wound. As it goes, I feel like that's at least going to be a useful damage rule, provided that you are taking a hefty amount of Deathwing models in this army, which I guess you would be if you're running it. Then it looks like that would add up to some solid extra damage over the course of the game. And in general, Terminator armor is tanky enough that you've got the defensive capacity against most enemies. What's really quite interesting though is that as per the article, it sounds like it hands out the Deathwing keyword to plenty of other things. They didn't explicitly say it, but I believe that any of the generic Terminator datasheets and characters within Codex Space Marines would get it. It would make sense, as they are all Terminator characters. And Games Workshop did kind of hint it with their example army list, with the Librarian Terminator armor being able to take a Deathwing only enhancement. That would imply that he'd get it at least. Otherwise though, they did say that veteran units and dreadnoughts all get the Deathwing keyword as well. So I guess by veteran units, that would not only be the Blade Guard that have been being painted in Deathwing colours up to now, but also the Stern Guard and Vanguard veterans, units that the Dark Angels don't tend to have been associated with all that much. I must admit it would feel kind of weird to see Stern Guard and Vanguard veterans painted up in Deathwing plates, but maybe that's the way of the future for the Dark Angels now. I guess Stern Guard could be getting some pretty devastating bolter fire rounds with +1 to wound with those scary bolters. Blade Guard are definitely like the +1 to wound with their strength 5 power weapons. And I guess for Dreadnoughts, the keyword's only going to be relevant for any stratagems that could be good on Deathwing keyworded units. So far, I don't think we've seen any of them yet previewed, but it wouldn't benefit from this detachment's core rule given that this one only affects infantry. Overall though, I definitely don't think it's a bad start, although I feel like perhaps the stratagems and enhancements in support might be the main thing for this force. Talking of which though, the only stratagem that we've seen so far for it is this one called Martial Mastery. In the Chaos vs Deathwing battle report, this was the only one that was used, and it was used twice, though I do kind of hope that it's because the Dark Angels player was just choosing to use this, as it made sense at the time, or some of the generic book stratagems were a bit more handy, and not just because the rest of the Deathwing stratagems are super weak. In any case, this one's a nice uncomplicated damage boost. You pick a Deathwing infantry unit in the fight phase, and they get to reroll 1s to wound against their enemy there. And then they get a benefit if it's against their vowed objective marker, you get to reroll the wound roll instead. Overall, I'm definitely not super enthused about just reroll 1s to wound. I guess you could be affecting really quite a big, fighty and dangerous squad, but overall it only adds up to a plus 17% damage increase, which generally isn't considered all that great for 1 CP. So it seems that perhaps the best target is going to be units on the vowed objective. If you are on the vowed objective though, I think it's only really going to be that useful for units that have a toughness that's higher than your strength. Say for example, if you had a Deathwing squad going in with Power Fists, they'd be wounding its toughness 10 vehicle on a 4+ due to that +1 to wound roll. And then for this one, it could allow you to re-roll that wound roll, so you'd actually be wounding tanks and hard targets 3 out of 4 times. That's seriously going to make Terminators punch lots harder against stuff that they might struggle to wound otherwise. Overall, that does seem pretty great for taking down big enemy nasties on that objective. Might be kind of borderline gains though if they were wounding them on a 2+ due to the special rule already, or you happen to use it elsewhere. In general, I just hope that the other stratagems for the detachment are actually somewhat good. Otherwise though, we've got the return of Deathwing Assault, and this has appeared as one enhancement for the Inner Circle task force. It looks like this one will cost 30 points judging by Games Workshop's example army list on how it improves over a Terminator Librarian. I'm not really too surprised that this one's fairly pricey, as it does seem pretty good to me. You use it on a Deathwing model with the Deep Strike special rule, and it basically allows the units to teleport into battle turn 1 rather than having to wait till turn 2 or turn 3 as they would have to do in most games that you play. So potentially means that you could get a big alpha strike on the enemy. Genuinely, I think that that's really quite strong for putting some Terminators in reserve. Means that you can just show up to the midfield with a massive amount of Space Marine might and potentially pin back the enemy nice and early. That does seem pretty scary on something like a massive unit of 10 Deathwing Knights. Something that even if they're at the forefront of the enemy army, they're probably going to struggle to destroy. They'd be able to deliver any shooting that they had, though given that Terminators tend to be more dangerous in melee compared with shooting, it is maybe a bit unreliable if you just deep strike them natively. Even with a command point reroll on the 9-inch charge, you've only got around about a 50-50 chance of making it, though you could do that without the CP reroll if you had a Terminator captain bearing this, I suppose. Otherwise though, it could be interesting for rapid ingress turn 1. Depending on the enemy, that does seem like that could be a very scary option. I guess if your opponent either doesn't have the guns in place that will be able to threaten them, or you can drop them somewhat hidden from the biggest threat, or they've just got too many targets to be able to deal with properly. You could have them drop somewhere between 9 and 12 inches, depending on how much you need to avoid combat, and then stride forward, shoot the enemy, and charge into combat the turn after. Overall, this one does seem great, I'd guess that if this detachment does become a competitive staple for the Dark Angels, this one will get wrong quite a lot. Overall though, I think it's a strong start for the Inner Circle task force. 3 rules so far seem genuinely useful, and we've still got 3 enhancements and 5 stratagems to go. Otherwise though, beyond the detachment rules, the Deathwing did get a fair few more previews, things for their units, and perhaps some of the most interesting reveals came for the Deathwing Knights with their power swords and relic weapon on their sergeant. First up, it sounds like the Deathwing Knight profile is going to be staying the same as it was already. They still have 4 wounds, and they still have their -1 damage in a circle rule as their core rule, and that basically just means they're going to be remaining as a very tanky, durable unit, where perhaps things like mortal wounds are some of the best ways to take them down. The new kit for the Deathwing Knights came with a few changes. It looks like the sergeant no longer gets a flail, but he still gets an interesting weapon according to this. But the other major option was that they now have the option to trade out their Maces of Absolution for power weapons. These do seem to hit a little bit harder compared with some of the standard power weapons out there. With the power weapons, the Deathwing Knights gets to hit 5 attacks, hitting on a 2+, strength 6, AP 2 and damage 1. So I guess as expected, they get some slightly higher AP compared with the maces and more attack, so they'll be better at killing lighter infantry and things. But I feel like perhaps that damage 1 profile just isn't really the most exciting in the world. It means that they're only going to be doing chip damage against vehicles or heavy hitters in general. I guess we'll have to wait and see whether their Mace of Absolution get any sort of tweaks to their profile. I could genuinely see them gaining strength potentially, though I could also see them changing around with their hit profile. They might only hit on a 3+. But in the previous index at least, they had 4 attacks hitting on a 2 at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 3. Overall for me, I think that having the big damage 3 probably outweighs the extra AP and extra attack that the power weapons get. I'd probably run with the maces over the swords myself. It's not like you're not going to hit enemy hordes really quite hard. Between these guys and the sergeant weapons, talking of which though, I think one move that will please Dark Angels collectors is that the Dark Angels Knight Master in this unit gets a relic weapon still. I think everyone was looking a bit disappointed given that the flail option for the sergeant was going away. There's no hint of it on the new kit unless there's options that we haven't yet seen previewed. But thankfully Games Workshop have given it a boosted profile no matter how you model it. They just say it's a generic relic weapon that hits far harder than the rest of the squad, whether you arm it with a fancy mace, sword, or convert a flail. This one hits at 6 attacks at weapon skill 2+, strength 7, AP 2 and damage 2 with lethal hits now. That really is spectacularly fearsome for a squad sergeant. That's a profile better than most Space Marine captains get to hit with, so really quite nice there. It has had a bit of a side grade compared with the old flail profile. It got 1 more attack and 1 more pip of strength, and then traded out sustained hits and devastating wounds for lethal hits. Against some targets it'll be a little bit better, against some targets it'll be a little bit worse. Overall no major change there, and I feel like that will greatly please people who still want to be running their sergeant with a big nasty flail. You just get this nice generic profile that can represent whatever fancy power weapon you want. Otherwise, for datasheets, one thing that I think a few people might have had on their wish list was for Belial to get some more interesting rules. It does seem though that he's largely unchanged from what we've seen so far. His melee is the same with precision attacks at strength 6 and damage 2. They stated his points cost will be remaining the same at 85 points in their example army list that we'll get onto in a second, and his special rule is still to give precision on critical hits to his units. Definitely a rule that in the right circumstances can actually be really quite big if it makes the difference between sniping a key enemy leader early or not. But in all honesty, I just don't think it's really quite as good in an all-comers type list compared with other things. Sure, you might be fighting an enemy army list where you get the option to snipe characters early and it's meaningful, but other times you might just be wiping out the entire squad with their melee damage anyway, or facing a list where they literally have no meaningful leaders for you to try and snipe. Say if there's things like Tech Marines around, or you're playing Imperial Knights, it's just going to be a completely wasted rule, and you might have taken something like a Librarian or a Captain or Chaplain instead, whose buffs don't depend on what the enemy takes. If that is the case, I might hope that they could have a points cut for him when the digital points come out. It would be a shame for this fancy new model to be quite as niche a unit in play as it is currently. Otherwise, for the actual Deathwing Terminator squad, these are listed at 205 points as per Games Workshop's example army list, so that will be going up 5 points compared with previously. And I feel like for these it could be alright, as they'll likely gain the Teleport Home a special rule with the option for their new Rapid Ingress thing. Unless they were making any misplays or anything, it looks like the example battle report from Games Workshop still has them have the same Deathwing rule as they had before. That's kind of interesting, as from the update between Index Space Marines and Codex Space Marines, the equivalent rule Fury of the First got a bit worse. It changed just to being the +1 to hit if you're targeting the Oath of Moment target, which the Deathwing still get, but they've also retained the ignore modifiers to ballistic skill or weapon skill. I kind of wonder if Games Workshop have pivoted that to be the Deathwing Terminators special thing, to represent that they're Terminators over and above what the other Space Marines can field. They still have their Plasma Cannon option, and fingers crossed they'll still retain rules for their Watcher in the Dark, which there is a model for on the Dark Angels upgrade sprue. That's quite a nice once per game rebound against mortal wounds if it stays. Finally, as I mentioned a few times already in this video, Games Workshop did provide this example Deathwing list, and unlike most other previews that they've done, this one actually lists some very specific points costs for the units within it, which I'd usually say is a helpful thing, but honestly I suspect that these points costs represent the actual printed ones within the codex, as opposed to whatever digital ones they come out with, as seems to be the system at the moment. Currently with codex releases, the system seems to be that Games Workshop releases the codex, puts the rules up for preview, and then just before the full book actually gets released and gets posted out to people and goes on sale in stores, they then update the points cost both on the app and on the digital downloads, and those are the points costs that are actually the true ones for the faction. Most of the points costs here are pretty much as expected, reflecting current costs in Codex Space Marines right now for the Land Raider, Ballistus Dreadnought, Belial, and the Deathwing Terminator squad, as mentioned, seem to have gone up from 200 to 205, though I guess that could be explained by the teleport homer. The thing that might worry Dark Angels players, though, is those new and very nice looking Deathwing Knights appear to have gone up from 235 to 290 points, despite from all the previews that we have so far being that they haven't really gained any utility. Don't get me wrong, at 235 points, they're a very useful unit, very tanky with that big defensive stat line, -1 damage, and melee that's capable of destroying most things, but they already are paying a small premium over regular Terminators for that, at 50 points more than the standard squad from the Codex. I genuinely hope that Deathwing Knights aren't going up from 235 to 290 points per 5, as without some sort of unknown significant rules boost from where they are at the moment, that would basically change them from a good unit to an utterly terrible one. It would be a pretty unfortunate way to make those shiny new Deathwing Knights into models that are going to look really good on the shelf of a lot of Dark Angels players, as opposed to hitting the board in terms of anything other than fun or fluffy lists. As I said though, just because that one seems so massively out of line with what you'd expect, I'd guess that that might represent the points printed in the physical codex, which often tend to be weird, and I'd hope that when the digital points cost for the codex comes out, it'll be significantly lower than this and a lot more like it is at the moment. I'm not saying they couldn't put them up a little bit if they really wanted to for codex internal balance, but I still generally hope for points cost somewhere around the 235 cost they are now. Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments though. It can be hard to interpret exactly what numbers the Warhammer community team have access to sometimes. In any case though, I wouldn't say it's the worst news for the Deathwing. I still think that Deathwing Strike Force Inner Circle detachment looks rather fun, particularly the enhancement for the first turn drop and the big damage boost. Both of those look cool. It'll be interesting to see what other sort of support they get for the detachment. Fingers crossed for a few more good enhancements and stratagems in there. Otherwise, as mentioned earlier in the video, I will just mention that Dark Angels giveaway I'm doing for the Deathwing Assault box set. This one's going to be the February giveaway for the channel, and I'm going to be posting out 6 copies of the box set, each to an individual winner. This one having the contents of 16 Terminators, including new Belial, and 5 of the Deathwing Knights, plus 2 upgrade sprues, the new Codex, and the new data cards. As per normal, per the Auspex Tactics giveaways, there's 2 equal ways to enter, both of them links down in the video description below. Either supporting the channel on the Patreon page, which gets you automatic entry each month, and it is the main way that I can keep all these videos coming if you have been enjoying regularly. Otherwise, you can also absolutely equally enter via social media completely for free, and you can do that doing these 3 actions: subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the Facebook page, and for the actual entry point for the draw, I put up a Facebook post on the 1st of February UK time. And to enter, reply to that post with a photo of any 40k mini or other imagery or whatever, with your name and the date handwritten within the same photo, the latter bit just to deter Facebook bots and spammers and make sure that the prize goes to a real person. I then put all the Patreon and the social media entries into a big draw, and I'll announce the winners in the regular channel update video that appears on the 4th of February. The box sets will be posted to the 6 people who I draw, and then they'll get sent as soon as I receive my orders from local gaming stores and things. In any case, feel free to check out the channel Patreon or Facebook, which are both links down in the video description. There will be further giveaways like this every month. In any case, let me know what you make of the new Dark Angels rules previewed so far. I'll leave a link to last night's Ravenwing video down in the video description as well. and I'll certainly look forward to reviewing the Dark Angels Codex in full as soon as we get the rules for it. Should be fun to take a look at the detachments of the Unforgiven and a few unit reviews as well. Finally, as well as entry to the giveaways, the channel's Patreon page does give a few other benefits, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes on what comes next on the channel, and a few other extras like names in the credits and things. Feel free to give that a look down in the video description if you're interested. An absolutely massive thank you to all folks who are backing and supporting the channel, and a massive thank you to just everyone in general for watching. I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.